All right, everybody, welcome to our first Roundtable cast here on the channel. It's been a long time since we've done this. I'm going to have to probably adjust things even more on the fly. But the last time I did this was recorded on Game Wisdom, and it went really well, but it was a lot of work getting set up. But thankfully, we have a new panel for tonight. We have 4 guests on, and we're going to be taking questions and discussing game design live. So, I'm going to give each one of them a chance to introduce themselves, and we'll go kind of, I guess, clockwise. So we'll go Shark, Tomo, Ramin, and Tim. So feel free while I'm adjusting things to kind of give a brief introduction, who you are, and what is kind of like your background in the game industry.
All right. Well, I'm Sharky, otherwise known as Jim Taker Sweet. I've released one game that has horribly failed. So compared to everybody else here, I'm very low on the experience level, but I have a high level of knowledge for where I'm at in the industry, but still have lots and lots to learn. And our last game was Chromasia Rock Paper Tactics, which had to be removed from Steam because we had the indoor LLC. And now we're working on Project Triad, and hopefully that goes successfully. And I think that's about it for me.
All right.
Hi, my name is Tomo Moriwaki. I've been a game designer for, well, I don't know for how long, since '97. I started in the console games industry about maybe 7-ish years ago, 8-ish years ago, whenever 2011 was. I kind of branched off on my own and did consulting and contract work. And in the last 5 years, I co-founded a studio 5 years ago called Hyperkinetic Studios. Probably my claim to fame is creative director on the Spider-Man 2 game from 2004. And internally at the studio, we're working on a game called Epic Tavern that's available on Steam Early Access right now.
Okay. All right, Ramin?
I think I played Epic Tavern. I like it, so I'm just going to say that. I've been in the industry for 20 years. I started as a pro gamer and game journalist, and then around 2005, I got the strange idea that we needed economists in games, so I started developing the field of game economics, and I went back to school for economics, and then I became the first game economist for Microsoft in 2012, and then I was the first game economist for 2K, and then for a couple of years I was the metagame designer for Wargaming, and did the metagame design for World of Tank Splits and World of Warships, and the projects I've been working on in the last few years haven't made it to market yet. A recent game I got on the team for just went to market this week, Gods Unchained from Immutable out in Sydney, Australia, which is a blockchain collectible trading card game, a little bit like Magic the Gathering or Hearthstone. We've been in the press a lot because we're backing some Hong Kong, Blitzchung with the, we took a different tact with Blitzchung than Blizzard did when they banned him. So that's what I do. I've been writing for Kama Sutra for 7 years. A lot of people know me from that.
All right.
Cool. My name is Tim Ruswick. I run a YouTube channel and community around game development. Helps you build, finish, and launch better games. I started in game development a long time ago, and I quit because it was just too difficult. Not that it was technically difficult. You could watch tutorials, you could look up stuff. It was just really difficult, and life got in the way, and I thought it wasn't possible to be a developer. So I started a YouTube channel when I got back to it on how to push past those barriers, and we built a huge community about it. I have one game out called Philophobia, The Fear of Love, which is a platformer where love is literal hell, and all the enemies are heart demons. It's fun. Working on a game called Cypherpunk, which is a hacking stealth roguelike. And I'm excited to be here, have a design chat with you guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had individual chats with everyone on here. They've all been like 3, 4 hour long ones. So it's still unsure where things are going to go. We've set a stop at 2 hours, but again, when you have 5 guys who can't stop talking about game design, who knows what's going to happen here? And I guess I should introduce myself for any new people watching. My name is Josh Beiser. I run the website and channel Game Wisdom, where my specialty is talking about game design and industry topics, obviously having lots of interviews with people around the industry, and I'm also a 2-time author on design, with my books 20 Essential Games to Study and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers out now, and I'm currently, fingers crossed, getting things locked in for book number 3. So it's going to be a very interesting time. And like I said at the start, this is the first time in about 3 years I've been doing we've had a chance to do a roundtable cast. And if people like this, we can always either do it with the same panel or get a rotating group of people in the future. So for the audience watching, let us know. And one final thing before we get started. Normally these casts go in a backlog when they're done, but considering that this is a special occasion, this cast, when it is finished, it's going to be public right away. So there will not be any wait time. So you guys who are missing anything can immediately watch it. But with that said, thank you everybody once again for coming on. This is going to be a fantastic conversation. So, we've already picked a few questions out, but we're going to leave it to the audience as well to kind of help frame things. So, if you have any questions for us regarding game design, game development, not with my voice going out, but other things, feel free to leave comments and questions and we will get to them. But to start the cast off, I figure I have a question, especially for any students or first-timers watching. So, here's a question for the table. Again, each of you have had experience designing games in the past as well as working on them now. What has been, I think, the most surprisingly difficult thing or the surprisingly difficult part of game development that you ran into, like with the games that you've made? And again, we'll go around the same order just to keep things straightforward.
So, my biggest obstacle has always been getting a team together. I can do most things in game development, but solo development is not the way to go, and I can't do everything, even if I wanted to go that route. But getting a team together with my very limited amount of funds has definitely been my most challenging area.
So, for myself, I'll go ahead and go with. I think the hardest thing in designing games for myself was getting over myself. I think when I was younger, I had kind of a bad attitude about what should and should not be. I didn't, with enough discipline or vigilance, kind of dig through the uncertainty that was in front of me, and paid a lot of prices along the way for not challenging my own premises. And at first, that created a lot of emotional resistance. By now, it still does, but I have more practice at least.
Oh. All right, Ramin, you're next.
I'm going to play it safe and say that when I was in St. Petersburg working on World of Warships and was the only American in the Lesta studio there, that for a while we had a very difficult time agreeing on how we were going to do, how to make the competition in the game fair. And it seemed like everything I proposed was rejected, and I didn't like what they were proposing either. And it was frustrating because I knew everybody really knew their stuff. You couldn't understand why we weren't getting past this. But then after about 2 months, I found that after talking to enough people, I realized that the Russian definition of fair was different than the American definition of fair. And that's what was holding us up. So I did a lot of questioning and found out what the differences were between fair there and fair here. And then I was able to create a compromise fair that worked for everybody. And then we were able to finish the design on World of Warships.
Oh my God, you got to tell us though what the essence of the difference is now.
People keep asking me that, and I'm not sure if I could explain it. It was pretty complex at the time. I think they really just wanted to make sure everyone had equal access, and a little bit of pay to win was okay for them. Whereas here, I think pay to win isn't as tolerated. Uh, um, and that was a but I think it was quite a bit more complex than that. I'm really simplifying it.
I always find that interesting, like the different cultural differences between actual beliefs, like what's okay and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I would say, like, unlike Sharky, I'm a solo developer. I do everything by myself. I do programming, art, design. Sometimes I try to do music. I have experience doing music, but I don't always make it to that. But that's one of the things I love about game development. The hardest thing I would say I've ever faced is definitely going to be non-technical stuff, and that's what my whole YouTube channel is about. The everything from design to motivation, all that. Never had an issue with anything technical, but when I was developing Phylophobia, clarity, man, being a solo developer, years into a project, you lose touch with what the thing is supposed to be. Phylophobia is a precision platformer. At one point, it was a roguelike. We rebuilt the movement system like 3 or 4 times. Like, I was just going crazy directions because I was just lost and alone, and I didn't have like these like pillars. And that was one of the hardest lessons I had to learn, is like, at some point, it's no longer about your ideas. It's about finishing, and finishing is a different skill set than designing. And like, you just kind of have to lock stuff in and just do the work, and rather than like just throw everything you think of in the project. And that was a hard lesson to learn.
Man, I know. I was recently looking up the game Manifold Garden. The developer and artist on that one spent 7 years making the game, and he said that several times they had to just completely restart and do everything from scratch. I think he said in an interview that he spent, like, he lost, I think, a good year to year and a half of work because he had to just redo something because it just wasn't working out.
A lot of people do that, and a lot of people never finish. And I didn't realize how many how many people actually don't finish until I started a community about finishing. And then I started to hear from all these people that, like, because you don't hear about the people that never release their game, right? That's the thing. It's interesting.
Yep.
I feel like they
I
should.
know the rate of finishing is super low, and it's just to finish a proper project, not like, some game jam or something, but a proper like 2-3 year project is just a huge rarity.
Well, it makes some sense too, because it only costs you a little bit of joy to buy more complexity, although it takes nothing but determination to close it down.
Yep. And it's so easy to get stuck in the weeds like that with any of the games. And I think that's actually a good segue into the first question we were talking about on our little chat about how to design a game around like hours of entertainment, or designing hours of entertainment to begin with. Because this is something I know all 4 of you have had experience with your various games. Because we've certainly seen kind of a shift in the consumer's perception of, what the value time-wise is to a game. There are some people who will spend 80, 100 hours plus on a single game as long as there's some carrot on the stick. There are some people who see an 80 100 hour game and now they just back the hell away because they don't have the time for that. And then we have games these days being designed around that very long form of just endless progression, live service. For the chat here, we've been, of course, joking about Fortnite for the past few weeks and just the insane amount of development in that game and content. And it's very hard these days just to know how much should actually be going into these games in terms of, a completed product.
So I don't have a lot of experience in this one, so I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. So I generally don't design a game around playtime. I try to, like our first game was Chromasia, which was an RPG. So when we were making that, I was like, well, if we look at most RPGs, their 40-hour experiences. There's no way we can do that within our level of scope. So how can I make this as long of an experience as I can without dragging the experience down? How can I use our assets in such a way that would get us to that as long as time as possible? And I think in the end, we achieved. My testers finished in roughly 17 to 21 hours, so roughly a 15, 20 hour game. And I think it needed to be shorter, honestly, because um, there's a little bit too much grinding in there, and I don't think grinding is as key today as it was back then. I think it would be there's definitely fans of grinding, and there's definitely after game, which definitely would supply that, because like the after game, I think you could go all the way up to about 70 hours or so. But I think that I should have cut that down and maybe made it maybe I don't know, instead of a 15 to 20 hour, made it a 10 to 15 hour game. Cut out maybe about 5 hours worth of stuff in there, mostly grinding, a little bit of grinding here, a little bit of grinding there, and made it more streamlined experience. Because there's still like 9 different endings, 8 regular plus a secret. So and I kept it minimum grinding, but minimum grinding I think is not minimum anymore. So I think we need to look at it from a new perspective as of RPGs and grinding, and cut those hours down, because the consumer base really doesn't have that much time anymore because of all the games that are being released every week on Steam and whatnot.
Have you got any comments or feedback on the opposite of that? Like anybody that said they enjoyed the length of the game or anything like that?
No, I mean we everybody loved it from what I could understand. My biggest complaint was the art in the game that was not up to par, which is pretty much all my fault, because I mix matched 2 styles without even realizing it. And but we had 100% positive reviews on Steam. Only got 14 reviews, but
Tomo and Bodhi in the chat both said that they enjoyed it. And the reason why I bring that up is because there are so many things that I hated about my game, Phalophobia. And then when I talk to people, sometimes the thing that I hated about it and I would have changed are the thing that people love about it. And it's so interesting to me, like, especially when you're talking about actual like time spent in a game, it's not all the same, because like I can add a system where you get 1 coin an hour and make you collect 100 coins, and you got to spend 100 hours in the game to get that. But that's not the same thing as like an actual system that's built around, different objectives that are shifting and different goals and different game loops and stuff that actually keep players engaged too. So I think it comes down to there's a big preference in there. Like some people like different stuff, and you got these giant Venn diagrams of like what's compatible with different people. But then I think that it also comes down to quality time, not just time, right? Because there's some games that they're just pure time, and those are compatible with some people too, in a different way. It's just for me, I like the distilled experiences a little bit more.
So I would ask Josh what he thought about the grind in it.
Yeah, man, I was just about to get that. I think Tim made a really good point there about kind of the difference between time and almost like quote-unquote quality time with games. Because I think I'm starting to get to that point as well. That if a game has too much grinding and it's just like I'm going through the motions, I just tend to lose interest in it. And I think even with something like Chromages, because I have so many games to play, that unless I like sit down and like focus on that game, I'm going to like trail off and lose interest. Like it's kind of like I've been feeling this way with a lot of games these days, where if I don't sit there and try and beat it or do as much as I can in that one sitting, I don't know if I'm going to have that motivation to go back and play it again. And I was doing that with a Manful Garden last night because the last time I played it before last night was about 4 weeks ago, and it just feels like it's a lot harder to get that motivation. And I know we were talking about this on our chat about the clicker genre, the idle genre, being like one of the more like insane examples of this.
Right. So maybe what I need to do is maybe take out a little bit of the grind, but take it mostly out of the front part of the game so that I can hook the players in there a lot easier and get them to commit to going all the way through.
Well, I don't think that the measure of success should be whether people get all the way through the game or not. I mean, I think that like part of what I enjoyed about the grind in Chromasia, let's say, and I don't even like calling it a grind necessarily, is that you had a certain number of systems. There's a certain amount of uncertainty to explore in those systems, and that demanded a certain amount of time. And so I guess I wanted to get specific, kind of some of your level replay mechanics accommodated spending that time. And it also, you kind of improve that experience, as we all do, by adding some amount of mechanical progression to it, so that by doing so, I'll also increment myself into some new things to explore. And at its essence, and I mean, honestly, when I'm going to answer this same question, I mean, I get very much into how much engagement can your system support, and what's the right rate at which a user should consume it. And I don't think Chromasia was too off target, honestly. I mean, I think that there's cleanup to be done at different points in the time frame, at different points in the sequence of the way the game was staged. But overall, I think that at least at the systems level, it's semi on target, really.
All right.
I haven't played Chromasia, but I feel like I need to now. I think the genre matters too. I think there are some games that require system interaction and you got to have this before you do that. You got to do that. You got to this level, whatever. But like Phalophobia, for example, the average player, it takes about 5 hours. Me, it takes about 3 hours, and there's speedrunners that blow my mind and do it in like 22 minutes, which a 5-hour game, I don't know, like, but they have videos of it, and I'm just like, I don't know how that's possible. But like, that's interesting too, is like allowing, that's a different approach, I think, is like, players can play the game as fast as they want to. Like, not every game can do that, I guess. But like, something to think about.
Well, and how much grinding does it take to get your game down to 22 minutes?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good consideration, because they're sitting there practicing every jump and every level and all that. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And I wanted to bring Ramin in because when we talk,
I have a very different way that I approach this. I don't know. Since 2014, I've been developing a field that I term as game neuroeconomics, where I didn't feel it was enough to try to figure out how game economies worked. I wanted to figure out why people actually played games, what was going on neurologically in the human that was causing them to see one thing as valuable or pleasurable, and another thing as just a grind or just uninteresting. Because my specialty is making really, really big games. I mean, my goal when I make a game is for the player to play at least for 2 years. A small game for me is a game that they'll only play for 1 year. But especially on a small budget, trying to figure out what you can give a player that they will value enough to do over and over and over again without it feeling like a grind is not only a very complex mathematical process, but also a very complex psychological, social, and neurological problem. So, and sometimes I have a chance to develop that over a long period of time, which is great. Sometimes I get dropped into a project with only a month or two to launch, and I have to try to scramble to make it feel right when the player plays that, which sometimes requires me changing a lot of different elements in the design that's already there. But I know if I don't nail these things, then then people will be like, oh, that was interesting, and then stop playing after 10, 20, 30 hours. And especially when you're talking about a very large budget game, and with the costs of user acquisition these days, if you're not keeping them significantly longer than that, then you're not really going to make much money, and you can't justify having a particularly ambitious or groundbreaking project.
Share the secrets. How do you do that?
Well, I write a
us.
lot of articles, and I try to share a lot of the secrets on Gama Sutra, but of course I've got a bag of tricks that I don't share. Part of the reason for that is because the same technologies that can be used to increase engagement could also be used to enthrall consumers in such a way that you could harm them if you didn't know what you were doing. And I see this happening a lot where game developers have discovered dopamine, and they don't understand dopamine other than just at a very rudimentary level. So they try to create these dopamine releasing cycles in their games to enthrall their consumers, but they're actually creating harm in the process because they don't understand what dopamine is there for, what its natural cycle is in the human body. And by just trying to say more dopamine, they're creating addiction, but they're not creating a healthy system that actually improves the well-being of the player, and ultimately this causes the player to become exhausted, just like the rats they're trying to emulate from Skinner's 1931 Skinner's box studies, and then they roll over and stop playing your game, and you lose them after a month or so, which is not a satisfactory result for me.
No, I think what you said about kind of like the neurological aspect of it. I mean, whatever the economy that matters the most, right? It relates to our attention. It's something that a lot of us at the office back when I was working at Treyarch, we'd play a lot of Age of Empires and Age of Empires 2, and we realized that the game went from being a resource management game at first, and it transitioned into an attention management game afterward. And I think just this logic of kind of attention economy and where I'm going to take my attention and why, I think really cuts to the essence of what we create.
Well,
Right.
There's healthy ways to do that, and there's unhealthy ways to do that, and most
And I'm
of what
guilty.
you're seeing out there, most of what you're seeing out there is just unhealthy, though, because it's interrupting people's sleep cycles, and they're just trying to keep people in the game, but or whether it's social media or whatever, but without actually filling a core consumer need that would actually make their lives better.
My girlfriend Nicole, she plays this game. I'm not gonna name it, but she plays it every day, every single day. It's on her phone, and she tells me that she hates it.
Oh no!
And I'm like, why do you continue to play it if you hate it? And she's like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, there's a problem there, because like she gets mad when I observe her, but I'm always like watching her game behavior and like what she does. But I find that so interesting. You're right. Like there's the engagement, there's the retention, but then there's like the whole, is it healthy? What level is healthy? Where's that line at between like what's okay? Are you improving someone's life, or are you making them play a game they hate every day? You know what I mean? Like there's a weird line there that you gotta figure out too. It's a whole ethics conversation.
Well, I mean, as an earnest hedonist, sometimes we push it too far on purpose.
It's profitable that way.
I actually design.
I meant that as a consumer.
As a developer, I actually design systems in my games. I assumed that I could make a person play 24 hours a day if I wanted to. But knowing that, I actually put reward limits in my game, so that after 4, depending on which type of game it is, 4 to 8 hours, that I turn off the spigot, and I'm intentionally trying to get them to leave my game after that period of time and go do something else, because I don't want the player to hurt themselves or have to choose between real life commitments and the game in order to be successful in my game.
And yeah, it's very tough. Like we've had this discussion. I know Ramin and I, we did several casts about this when it comes to that idea of game addiction and just where that line is. And I'm actually finishing up a presentation that I'm going to be showing to some parents next week on that topic. And that's the thing, like, video games are meant to be addictive. They're, the best games keep your attention for hours and hours on end. But I think from our conversation, I mean, like, we had that talk about how, playing a game because you want to play a game is different than playing a game because it demands that you must play this game every day, 2 to 3 hours, or you will lose progress, you will fall backwards, and it becomes worse for you.
Well, the most dangerous games are the ones that tell you when to play.
Yeah.
And especially so if they threaten your progress in the game when you're logged out, because they're trying to force you to log back in. And this creates 24/7 stress on the player, because the moment they log out, they could be attacked, their stuff could be taken away.
Oh, yeah.
And the way you can usually identify these types of games, which are literally hostile to the health of the player, are that they'll sell you like a shield or something like this for 24 hours or 7 days. It will protect you from attack. So if you pay them, they will let you sleep. But if you don't pay them, they don't let you sleep. And this goes straight to the core of how you can really harm a human with these types of systems.
Yeah.
So have we defined a new term of pay to sleep?
Nice.
Yes, yes, no, that's a good. I like that.
There you go. It's going to be his next article. Yeah.
Although I know it's not the same kind of game, but my experience with 24-hour stress in a game was way back when Travian was out, and I became I played at least one server round really hardcore, and that was a good time. It was interesting. It was like I was living the war.
I've had my bad experiences with similar games.
I've found that like the reason that I play games, because I've tried to like identify it too, is usually to calm my anxiety. Because for a long time I didn't know I had anxiety, I didn't know what anxiety was. But like when I play a game and I go into a world and I can explore and I can do all these cool things, it calms me down. And I've noticed there are games like that just they do the opposite. They amp it up. They make me feel like, yeah, I need to do this. I need to go. I have to get home because I have to do that. And it's just,
yeah.
I didn't identify it first, but like the more that I identify it as a designer, the more I just like will shut those things out from my life.
Yeah.
I'm with you, Tim, because I have anxiety problems too, and I played some games and they were soothing up to a certain point, and then when it was you have to always be online and you have to sleep in 1 hour increments in order to be safe, and that just killed my anxiety, and it made me worse.
Yeah.
Sharky's not exaggerating either.
Yeah,
There's games that are just like that.
Oh yeah. I played that game, Marvel Puzzle Quest, for one summer, and they did exactly what Ramin described. The tournament comes to an end. Oh, but you're going to be attacked unless you pay us like $4 for a shield. And they sold the shield at like 3 different increments. So it was like an hour-long shield, 4-hour shield, and then the 24-hour shield's, of course, the best value. I know that's a term I think Ramin has probably seen more times than any of us combined at this point.
I become particularly concerned when these games are played by children, because these games raise your cortisol levels for the complete day when you're engaged in it. I mean, for the entire duration of playing the game, if it's months or even years, your cortisol levels are elevated. And we know that elevated cortisol levels in children can actually cause permanent damage, including genetic damage, that is so severe it can be passed on to their children, even if the child's only 10 years old, because it alters DNA on an epigenetic level that can actually be passed on to their children. And this is something we don't understand well. We don't understand what we're doing to these children, and we won't know for 20, 30 years. And so I of course, I'm advocating extra healthy dose of caution there.
So you're saying some of these games can actually cause physical harm to people and to children?
I wrote an article called "I'm Dying to Play," where I actually explained how gave some case studies of people who had died playing games, including one of the games I was responsible for on some level, World of Tanks, when I was at Wargaming. And I wrote it while I was at Wargaming, about a Twitch caster who was trying to do a 24-hour Twitch stream, and I think died at hour 22. And I went into detail explaining for not only consumers but also doctors what most likely killed this individual,
It's crazy.
and how you can prevent that, especially if you're like a professional esports player. You need to know this because you need to know how to be able to do your sport, safely and sustainably.
Mm-hmm.
Do you
So
think
kind
there's
of on. Oh, go ahead.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask do you think there's a thing similar to that, or maybe you know something I don't, about like dopamine levels? Because I know like certain games will give you dopamine releases, and is there a way that your body can get used to those higher releases, and it can actually like maybe in some way rob you of joy in actual life, or to contribute to depression or anything like that?
Well, there's an amazing test that you can take online that only takes 2 minutes. It's 10 true or false questions, and it's called the ACE test, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it turns out that it's the world's best predictor of lifespan. And the reason it's able to do this in 2 minutes is because what it's testing for is basically indirectly it's measuring how much cortisol you were exposed to as a child, and cortisol exposure in children is so potentially harmful, especially when it comes to lifespan, that's why this has such a profound effect on lifespan and how it can be predicted this way. It's less certain what the effects are of stress on adults, but there's been a tremendous amount of research on its effects on children. And even if the stress is seen as positive by the user, the body doesn't know that. It still has these cortisol levels increased. So anything that triggers the sympathetic nervous system, like dopamine, would presumably raise your cortisol levels, especially if it was done over a long period of time. So anything that you're engaging in that's triggering dopamine release, whether it's a game that's been designed for that purpose or some form of social media that's been designed for that purpose, if it's used by children and they're engaging in it possibly to the exclusion of sleeping, then this is going to have a long-term effect on the individual
That's fascinating and
that we
terrifying.
don't understand yet. Exactly.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
still have to learn a lot on that. I've been studying bit by bit on a lot of your papers, Ramin, and trying to figure out things because I very much need to know how to do this in a consumer-friendly way for our current game that we're working on, Project Triad.
Well, if we kind of want to start flipping the script a tiny bit and start kind of talking about, how do you successfully get a player kind of in a long-term engagement relationship with something that you create, insofar as the time, like, first of all, as a gamer, I have hundreds and hundreds of hours in many a kind of long haul, systems heavy types of PC games, probably epitomized by Paradox Interactive, games like Hearts of Iron, games like Crusader Kings, games like War Fortress, Mountain Blade, Warband. I have God knows how many hours in how many different games, but those they aren't the kind of games that pressure you to play them. Although at some point it is like an infection in your mind. And that is absolutely what I strive to create with respect to Epic Tavern. But I think a big piece of that might mitigate some of these negative consequences that we're talking about is that you don't pressure the player. And personally, I don't pressure the player not because I want them to be healthy, because it's not necessarily what I'm thinking. I'm all hedonist all the way. It's like, how can we get more drugs, better drugs? And if we intend to do them for a long time, it must be sustainable. It's at your leisure. It's entirely up to you. Try to create a safe and happy environment to return to, rather than I guess very much invented by the very, very wealthy mobile developers out there, I guess, this kind of pressure. the stress that can come with it. Instead, it can just be a thought infection, and you are stressing a tiny bit because if I'm leading the rest of my life and doing what I'm doing, I might be thinking a little bit about what that next turn might be in that game that I've been getting into. Maybe it was Stellaris last year. And to be fair, there is no way that I haven't had negative health consequences from the amount of gaming and the stress of game development. I don't think they're too serious necessarily, except for maybe my tech neck and bad posture over the course of 20 years. But at the same time, if that's as a joy for myself that I want to duplicate for others, I very much am enamored with the kind of hardcore, often turn-based, but not all of them are turn-based. But they all have a certain tranquility to them, but an enormous set of uncertainty and rules that require your brain to get highly engaged to start disentangling.
Yeah, can I just tell you why I play Epic Tavern and why I think it's a healthy game?
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, first of all, I can turn it off. I turn it on and off anytime I want. There's no consequences for me to pause the game and do something else that is required in real life. There's no consequence for me saving the game and coming back to it later. Other than that, if I wait too long, I may not remember where I was at and what I was doing. So that makes your game not a threat to me if I want to play it. That right there is like the number one biggest criteria for me to play a game. So right there, you're already and like you said, you mentioned the word turn-based. Any game that's in real time is going to have stress written all over it. And since I'm very careful about minding my stress, especially since I'm pretty old as far as game developers go, I try to, and I also have a very high ACE score. I try to keep my stress levels as low as I can, despite my occupation. And so a game like yours is relaxing for me and isn't going to add to my stress load.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very much on purpose. I mean, the way we see trying to make games over Hyperkinetic is developing a long-term relationship with the player. That's voluntary.
I'm after kind of the same thing with my current project. I went back and forth for a lot of different things, but I wanted to keep the turn-based aspect of a roguelike because I feel it's so interesting to watch playtest how some people, because the game will literally move as fast as you do, right? So the turns they're not complex, they're just quick one action turns. And some people play it like a real-time game. They'll just boop, 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 move, 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 go, go, go. And some people are like, move once. Move once. And one, I think there's an accessibility factor there. Like literally whatever kind of person you are, you can approach this game however you want. But two, I guess I didn't really realize I was doing this until listening to you guys talk, but like that's what I'm after, is that lack of pressure and anxiety. At any point, I don't even have to pause the game. I can look at the game and it'll just stay exactly where it's at until I make a move. And I love that so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think like for me, I'm the boom guy. Like I can't sit and play a game and just spend like 20 minutes a turn. That's what kills me, like trying to watch anyone play like a CCG or deck building game. They're like, what card should I play? I don't know. I'm just saying there, just pick the card, just keep going. I can't sit there and just watch someone like spend 20 minutes deciding on a card there.
Well,
That brings an
when I
interesting
play,
point. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say that it brings up an interesting point about streamability and how that affects the culture of gamers.
So what I was going to say was that when I play a card game, is I normally plot out my move while it's still the other person's move. I'm like, well, I try to read my opponent, and I'm like, okay, they're playing this kind of deck, so their strategy could be one of these three things, more than likely. So I try to identify their strategy and figure out what they're going to do, and then I save up stuff in my hand that is specifically to counter their strategy without building a counter deck, because I hate counter decks. But I do stuff that they would see as a threat, but is not actually a threat going against for my actual strategy. And just plot out the move beforehand during their turn, and only if they have played outside of my expectations do I pause. But if they don't, if they play within my expectations, I got some pretty quick play in there.
Playing your opponent as much as playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
Dude, that's what makes MP so good, because other humans are free uncertainty for the developers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, unlimited craziness.
And I know that's one thing Ramin and I spoke about on our previous discussion about that kind of player-centric or player-focused content as being a key part about keeping the longevity of these games going without needing that endless development cycle.
That's what we're going for in our current game.
I think you probably will never see me streaming any of the games I play, because I think if people realized how intensely I play, I get a little competitive. I would probably get institutionalized.
Nice.
Yeah, I need to be careful, like trying to stream any puzzle games or things like that, because the stream will just be 2 hours of me just sitting there, like intently staring at the screen, not saying a word, trying to like process what's going on. Because if I try to play a puzzle game and talk, I tend to fail because I'm so busy. My brain's like split 3 different ways. Let me see. We did get a few questions from the chat. And I actually want to, when we get to our topic, talk more about like ethical design. There's an example I want to pull up with Call of Duty, but we'll come back to that. But a few questions came in. I guess first, like keeping with what we were just talking about, let me scroll up. I think Thorn asked this. Oh yeah, this is about the dopamine, and again, like keeping people or not pressuring people to play. And he wanted to know: is there a way to inundate people from specific kinds of dopamine? Example, a loot box training game that cuts their desire for a specific loop.
I assume that's directed at me.
Yeah.
Your body isn't that specific. Your hormones are once they're released, they stay in your bloodstream for 15 minutes, an hour, and it's non-specific. It affects your entire body. And the reason that your endocrine system is endocrine system is able to take the load off of your central nervous system, because your central nervous system would have to keep sending the same message over and over again to do something. It acts in real time, and it gets fatigued very rapidly. So when you need to do something that's going to last for a while, like be angry or be threatened or be in love, these are things that you want to last for at least 15 minutes, hopefully. And so you release a hormone that's related to this, and the hormone will just affect almost every cell in your body, and it's not specific. So you take the good and the bad with having that hormone in your system. So if dopamine or adrenaline or any of these other chemicals gets released, you're stuck with it for a while. So you can't really specifically target that as a developer, and you have to be conscious of that. But there are counter chemicals to these chemicals. For instance, with cortisol or adrenaline or even dopamine, all these sympathetic nervous system stimulators, you can counter them with a parasympathetic nervous system stimulator. My favorite being oxytocin. Oxytocin is often described as the trust hormone or the love hormone. And if you want to use that to take the edge off, or to even antidote somebody from the stress you've been providing them somewhere else in the game, then you need to know how to trigger that in your games. And that's basically going to require you develop social systems that involve bonding and codependence, not the clinical type of codependence, but interdependence between players. And that's something that, as an industry, we're not very good at developing yet.
Well, I also feel like it's worth noting that probably most developers out there don't have an adept enough understanding, or they're not adept at using their tools to manipulate users to kind of create, I guess, a collapsing dopamine cortisol loop of sorts to mess people up. Sometimes they get lucky, but I mean, generally speaking, the greatest artists of our history, I guess, definitely show signs of with subtlety and nuance, creating stable, good feeling loops. And I think if you take something essential to storytelling, like the word pacing, you find that intuitively, at least, because I'm sure those people from way back when had no idea that this is how the chemicals work, but they found that to create the best enduring products required you to balance some very delicate human things. And it's, when I think of dopamine, I think of anticipation. It's like I start to tell the story and I have this amazing punchline and I just wait a bit before I get to it. That alone, right, gets a little bit of a surge, and by itself, that's not a problem. I think it's because the high-speed nature of things like slot machines and kind of a more sophisticated emergence in recent times with the mobile games and their ability to kind of gather data to try to like close that loop up, that we start seeing certain kind of negative, at least more widespread negative results.
I've seen with movies, the movie industry has been working on this formula for over a century, and they've figured out that you need to have like a certain amount of uptime and then some downtime in the movie, and then uptime and then downtime, and they figured out that like the ideal number of these peaks and troughs is like 6 in the movie. And so they engineer it so you're going to be like have like 6 moments in the movie where it's going to be kind of tense or exciting, and then 6 times where you're just character developing or letting the person cool off between actions. And I'm actually was doing something very similar in, for instance, like World of Tanks or World of Warships, where you have like a battle that lasts up to 15 minutes, and then you mess around in your garage and play with your ships or your tanks for up to 15 minutes, and you cool off so you're not just constantly stressed, and then you go back and you do another action. And trading card games can sometimes be a little bit like this, where you stop, play with your deck, and do some fine tuning, and then go back in. And this is critical because this allows the body to not be maxed out and stressed all the time.
When I was designing levels for Phylophobia, because it's precision platformer, when I approached this, and I started this game like 5 or 6 years ago now, so I didn't know anything about design or anything, but I just assumed it was like a straight like diagonal line of like difficulty, right? You start with the easy levels, then you go hard. But as I started playing them, I started realizing, okay, at some point I don't want to touch it. I don't know. I'm to the hard stuff. I don't want to be. It gave me that anxiety I was looking for, and I realized, just like you said, you need the downtime. You need a hard level, kind of hard level. Okay, simple level. Even in way advanced sections of the game, you need some sort of like release. Like maybe you're building it up, and then you need like a little bit of release. And it's interesting how you can feel that playing. Like and I don't even know how to describe it, because like I didn't know I was consciously doing this at the time, but I was just like rearranging levels based on that. Like, okay, I feel like it's at its peak here, and then okay, boom, kind of come down. I think that's super important. And you look at some of the formulaic movies that are coming out. The reason they follow that formula is because it works.
Yeah, and I talk about that in my book about platforming for that very reason. That again, it's that misconception that it just keep escalating the difficulty curve, and people are going to keep playing. But you're going to drive people away just because of the sheer amount of like almost like mental fatigue that takes place. That it just keeps getting harder and harder. And also from a design standpoint, how do you keep that up with each new level? Because eventually you're going to run out of ideas to in terms of difficulty. And to Ramin's point about like the movie industry, like I'm thinking about the same thing with my book about horror design. That same kind of build up and release of tension that's there, and you need that, or the whole experience just kind of falls apart.
Yeah, a thing I used to tell new designers was that boring is an essential color in the palette, in that you use it to pool potential interest or excitement.
And again, like there's only so many ways you can do that bombastic set piece as well. Like a game of nothing but set pieces like that, it just becomes like a lot of noise for the player.
Michael Bay movie kind of thing.
I'm thinking about XCOM 2 and thinking about how much I really the gameplay and how much I enjoyed the metagame. I see myself as a metagame designer. I do the stuff between the gameplays that keeps you interested. And the metagame for XCOM 2 would be like working on your base, working on your characters between missions, so you feel like you're ready for that next mission. But as the difficulty ramps up in those games and it gets so extreme, I find that any little mistake causes a wipe, and I end up finding myself reloading a lot. And this is when I end up stopping playing a game. So like I never get to the end of XCOM 2 because after a certain number of reloads, I'm just like I'm getting annoyed because I'm doing a lot of reloading and it's breaking my immersion. And so like you said, the difficulty can get so high that it actually breaks the game. Not because it's not too hard, because it's too hard for the player. I could totally get to the end if I want to reload enough times, but I just lose my immersion and I'm like, okay, this is just not as fun as it was in the beginning.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same way with XCOM 2, that I have restarted that game at least like 30, 40 different times, especially, as you said, like the higher difficulty levels. Because one mistake and that's it. And like the first mission, like it's considered accepted that in XCOM 2, if that first mission doesn't go 100% perfectly, just restart, because you're going to be behind the curve at that point. And you're given less freedom at the higher difficulties to kind of experiment and do different things. Because, like, if you try a strange tactic, in the lower difficulties, if it fails, your guy gets hit, 2-3 points of health. At the higher difficulties, he's dead. All those hours you spend training them, all that gear, say goodbye. And that was one of the things I loved about Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle from a tactical strategy standpoint, was I could do those insane strategies, and if it failed, I could still pivot to try something else. It wasn't, Mario's out of position, he gets headshot, and now he's dead for the next 5 battles.
So how do you balance that, though? Because, like, XCOM has that difficulty, but because of those, like, risks of losing your guys and all this investment and stuff, I think it adds to the... I don't even know what the thing is, but, like, it engages me more because, okay, there's more on the line, right? It's not like... so like how do you keep that same level of like engagement? Because I have the same problem with my roguelike right now. The disconnect point is after you spend an hour and a half traversing all these places, doing all these things, collecting all this stuff, and then you die. It's gone. It's wiped. That's the quit point, right? Like that's usually where everybody's like, okay, how do you keep that level of I guess depth and like ability and engagement and risk without that downside?
I don't have this problem in MMOs because I don't let anyone save and restore. Everyone's on the equal footing. I mean, if you either do well or you don't, and but the more you fail, presumably the more you're going to learn, and you'll do better over time. One of the things I like about roguelites is if they're in hardcore mode and there's no saving the game, then you just do the best you can, and you know you're going to fail up front, and you don't see that as like a loss, especially if a lot of these roguelikes give you something for losing. You lost, but here's your reward for losing. Now it'll be a little easier next time you go through because you can unlock this character or this ability, and so you still feel like you're progressing even though you technically wiped.
Yeah, just give them a little something right there at the end. That's interesting too from a timescale perspective, because that shifts the whole player progression, where like most games get kind of more difficult. I feel like some of the roguelites, they do that where they give you stuff and they make it easier, so then the game kind of has the opposite curve where the game gets easier as your skills progressing, and like at some point those cross, and I feel like they don't hold my attention.
Yeah, that's what I ran into with playing Rogue Legacy. That there's that break-even point where I'm already as good as I'm going to get to, and then I'm just kind of running out the clock in terms of experience to the point that I can then, have that stat bonus. We ran into that same thing the other night with Dead Rising. Dead Rising is a very fascinating case about time management and progression because it was very much like the proto concept for roguelike design. Like, people complain. I remember seeing reviews about, oh, I die and have to restart the game. It's like, yeah, that's a roguelike right there. Like, why are you arguing about that? And it's that very weird thing with XCOM as well, that there's so much on the line. But again, that's what makes it interesting. And there are people, again, who will only play XCOM on Iron Man difficulty. Just like I only play action RPGs on Iron Man difficulty, because I can't play a game like Grim Dawn or Diablo on normal, because then it's just boring to me. Because I know that I can just literally send my guy to die 100 times and he'll eventually beat that boss. Where's the challenge there? I need that threat of, 80 hours of your character will be gone if you mess up, to keep me interested.
I think, like, I'm no expert in roguelikes or anything, but I think a general rule to kind of avoid that is make it to where when the player loses, he doesn't lose a lot. There's not like, oh, I just lost 8 hours of gameplay kind of thing right there. I think, it's more acceptable generally if they only lose like an hour or 30 minutes or something along those lines. But there have been successful games that allow you to lose more kind of thing. And I don't know exactly how those work out that way, but I think that kind of generally you want a shorter gameplay loop.
I think that's valid. Another solution that I've come up with too for just working through this is rather than, because that reward during a loss is important. If it's just a loss, most people can't handle it because it literally wipes everything. And I think a certain type of audience enjoys it, but a lot of people are just like, that's the disconnect point. So one of the things that I've tried to do with the progression system in my game is, rather than give you like a +1, like kind of like roguelikes, like you get better. You have more stuff. Is focused on variance instead of like +1s. Like Binding of Isaac does this kind of good, where like you can unlock stuff to discover or that can show up in the world. So it changes the gameplay. It doesn't give you advantages, so it's not making the game easier, but it's more variant. It's different. And I think that's an interesting approach of like, rather than like try and give you things that make the game easier, make the game different or give you different ways to play or different game modes on different character unlocks that have different abilities that do different things. Like not better things, different things,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I feel like we're getting a little caught up on the difficulty curve itself as something that fundamentally needs to be solved. I think if we took a step back and simply described it as patterns that repeat will decay for player interest. And so if your difficulty curve just climbs, especially if it climbs the same amount every step, there's a certain point, players bored. They believe they know what's going to happen next, so they don't have to play it. And so the key being, and a lot of what we were talking about, is that the ups and downs aren't there to kind of, they aren't necessarily only there so I can rest from the stress. They're there so I can experience something different, because if I only experience the same thing over and over again, time to look for something else to experience.
I agree.
And that was one of the things I think with Darkest Dungeon being another big example. Darkest Dungeon is a game that there is that min-max best way of playing it. Like, I'm watching a YouTuber who's trying to beat the game on the highest, typically with no deaths. And he's at the point now where the dungeons themselves are just routine, because there's only one correct way to kind of survive that game, even with RNG as a factor. And like you said, Tomo, like when it devolves into that routine, the same thing with XCOM, the same thing with like any difficult game, it's like, what's the point of playing? Like, if I know that if A, B, and C doesn't happen the exact way and I lose, where is like my input at that point?
I would go so far as to say is that the entirety of player engagement has to be predicated on resolving uncertainty.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of the work you've done leading up to that point for that player, the nature of that uncertainty is essential for them to continue to play. So they have some belief that there is some unknown thing that they can understand better or uncover, then they keep going. And the moment they no longer believe that you're going to give them something new, they'll look to do something different.
Yeah.
That's beautifully said. That's exactly what happened with me in Darkest Dungeon.
Yeah.
12 hours in, I could not stop playing it. It was like 3 days in a row. Like, boom. It was so interesting. It was so great. So well done. And then at some point, I realized I'm just going, reducing stress, going back in. Like, I kind of got it. And then I no longer needed it because I was just like, I get the gist of everything.
You cracked the code, essentially.
Right.
Yep, and in chat, Ryu brought up Monster Hunter. And I think that's another really good example, because I ran into what Tim just described. Same thing happened to me in Monster Hunter, at least with the base game. That I was playing it, like, the end game is just basically repeating the monster fights, getting more armor, more gear. They raise the difficulty up by making the enemies have either faster AI patterns or let them do more damage. And I hit a monster rank or a hunter rank 50, which is kind of like, that's kind of like the end game kind of thing in terms of what they start introducing. But at that point, I realized I'm just still fighting the same things. I'm still just doing the same fight. Yes, it's harder, but I'm just still repeating that same thing. And as you just said, Tim, when I hit that point, I was like, I know it already. Like, I figured this game out. Why should I keep playing from here? And that was the point where I just realized I'm installing this game until the expansion comes out, because there's nothing more that this game can show me.
I played Destiny a ton. So I bought Destiny on launch, the original one, and I didn't understand the game at all. And I was just like, I expected Halo, and I was just like, what is this? But then my friend kept saying, no, like, come on, do this thing. And I started like paying attention, and one day I went into the tower and I saw this guy that was selling these crazy exotic items I didn't even know existed. And I was like, whoa, how do I get those? And then my friend invited me to a raid, and I didn't even know what a raid was. And it was this crazy 6-player experience with this epic like time machine with this crazy Time Lord boss and these robots. And I was just like, what is it? Destiny kept me playing for 4 years as a hobby. It almost every day, I probably 4 or 5 times a week, I would play that game over and over and over again. There was such a sense of mystery, and I didn't know if I got all the thing. There were so many things to get, and there were so many things to look for and think about. When Destiny 2 came out, they tried to, for lack of a better word, casualify the experience, and they made everything a little bit more transparent, and they showed you a little bit how to do things, and they made it specific on what did. That killed the game. I lost interest in that game in like a month. And it was because of, I think, now that I'm thinking about it, it was like that sense of like, I did the things, and the things that I didn't do, I know what they are, and they're not even that interesting to me. It was just like, it lost something from that experience of like discovery, and I think Tomo's perfect on the track, like that sense of like, there's more to discover here. And that's what kept me playing for 4 years in Destiny, and just Destiny 2 didn't have it. They've gotten better at it since, but just didn't have it.
It's also the same rules.
Yeah, I probably got burnt out too.
I wanted to mention the comment that Josh made about XCOM, where he said, if you didn't get the first mission right, you had to start over because any negative effect would snowball throughout the game. And you see this a lot because there's like these economic effects in games, even in games that don't look like they have economic effects. Because if you overperform and do really well, then that's going to cause you to do even better, and your positive effect is going to snowball over time, and the game will get too easy. On the other side, if you start off and you get an error and you didn't have something you needed to bring to the second mission, the negative effects will spiral, and the game will get too hard, and you'll wash out very quickly. So these types of games where they have compounding effects from mission to mission can be very difficult to balance, because and ultimately it can't be, because the player will either get worse and quit, or get better and get bored. So it's very difficult you got to be very careful when you're handling those kinds of effects, especially in a game that doesn't even look like it's an economic game. I run into this a lot when like Endless Space is a good example. Endless Space 2, I love this game, but I either get a bad setup and can tell within 20 or 30 turns that I'm going to get screwed, or I just end up trouncing the AI, and I'm pretty soon I have double everyone's power score, and then I quit because I don't want to just the result is going to be so predictable.
Yeah. I ran the same with a Dungeon of the Endless. I think that was done by the same studio.
Yes.
And yeah, like right there, that basically within minutes of like any kind of bad thing, I know I'm done. Like there's no way I'm going to recover. And I think this is one of the reasons that I've still kept my interest in the Binding of Isaac. That runs can just fluctuate wildly on every given floor. That something bad doesn't mean it's going to continue to be bad. I could get some amazing item on the next floor that completely turns things around, or the opposite. I can have a good run go sour, and I don't know. And it's tough to design a game like that because again, with the XCOM and Darkest Dungeon examples, it's the opposite. Something bad happens, guess what? It's going to become very hard, almost impossible to recover. One of the things that really killed my very first run of Darkest Dungeon was the final set of missions are a lot more linear. You have a set boss fight with a set strategy to get to him. If you don't do that right, your 4 characters are dead. And that is hours of grinding those 4 characters to get to level 6 completely out. And you have to do that every time you attempt that dungeon. And I got a point where, again, like as someone said, like the pattern just kept repeating. Like, I don't want to do this anymore if I only have one specific way to win.
Yeah, I had experience playing a roguelike card game, and basically I got this really bad setup and just a bunch of cards that were really horrible, and they were I was doing everything I could to hang on, and then all of a sudden I got one new card that I had never seen before. I hadn't played the game a lot, and that one card added to the cards I had that were really crap. That one card turned all the crap cards into amazing cards, and then it was godlike unstoppable, and I was amazed with it. It was the addition of one missing puzzle piece that made all the sections, all the cards that were really horrible, even all together without that one piece. But once you added that one piece in there, it was just god tier.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well,
I love that experience.
I feel like that points to this other aspect of kind of maybe something in the nature of sort of unhealthy systems, right? If your motivation to explore the space is because you're hoping to get lucky, and when you get lucky, it feels good, that you may be going down some of those darker paths, right? It's so much of the, I guess, PC games of yesteryear are built on you exploring the rules and learning what they are and trying to understand how it works, and then your understanding leading to better results. And there's something, maybe fundamentally more stable about that kind of an experience than one that is fundamentally more random in nature. That it seems like people can acquire a gambling addiction if one of the first things they do is win big.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, there's a great book I read called it's by some MIT professor, called Designing for Addiction. Maybe I'll look it up. It's too good not to give you the good string for it. But Jesus. But true, like, if I get an enormous dopamine buzz on something I have no control over the likelihood of, I'm now a servant to the system, sort of, in some ways, right?
I could write a book just talking about designing for addiction. You know who's not going to write a book about designing for addiction? Me. because I could, and I don't want to be the one who wrote that book, because I don't want to be responsible for teaching people how to design games for addiction.
The book is called Addiction by Design, Machine Gambling in Las Vegas. It's a great story. It also talks about how Las Vegas is fundamentally supported by the money made from slot machines and not from other sources generally. It's fascinating read. And there are some actual really good nuggets that can help us out from a design standpoint. Perhaps if you were to take the entire idea wholesale, you might be choosing a particular moral path for yourself, I guess.
And on that subject about how if you win the first time, it hooks you further. I know again, like Ramin and I, we spent that one of those casts on about the whole free to play market and how your first loot box roll always just so happens to give you an epic or higher than normal character. Again, to engage that player and say this can always happen. You will always get that great item, and of course, it creates that endless chase.
Well, you're taking advantage of the defects in inductive reasoning, where they think, well, if this happened this way 3 times, then it's going to happen that way on the 4th time. So you train a person to have a certain expectation, and you change the rules on them without telling them. And then they're just thinking, oh, I got unlucky. They don't know that the rules have been changed on them.
Anchoring and confirmation bias, it will always be our downfall.
And one question that Oscar asked, he asked this a long time ago, but I was trying to wait for like the right moment to say it, because I think this is another one that can segue into who knows how many different conversations. But for each of you, what has been the most surprising change in the last 10 years for the game industry?
Sharky's first in line.
I don't know how to answer this one. I'll pass, and I'll come in later.
Okay, well, for myself, most surprising change, I mean, I'm a little bit on the older side, and so I feel like the degree of success that, or the degree of people's adoption of watching other people play games was not something that I was expecting or seeing, and it was outside of my kind of interests at the time. My perspective has changed quite a bit since then, but when Twitch became a thing, I was probably a little hostile to the idea, honestly. And so I think that I was not at all expecting and was a big surprise for me.
I think Tim's next.
Are we going to? We're going to. Okay, I'll go next. I would steal Tomo's, but he already said that, so I'm gonna go to the next one because I agree. I did not see that coming, but it. I wake up every day and I watch indie game YouTubers. It's like my morning routine now, and it's so awesome to be able to experience indie games from other people's perspective. I feel like it's so much better than going through them myself. But I would say that the most surprising change for me was the accessibility of the game dev industry. There are so many tools, so many ways to make games. It is so easy and simple to, and there's some going to be people, no, it's crazy hard, but there are tools that make it very easy compared to downloading an Android SDK and trying to figure all those out and installing all the little pieces. And I went through all that trying to make games back in the day, like back in high school. Oh my god, it was ridiculously hard just to get a box spinning on the screen. And I wasn't even like in the beginning of it. So seeing tools like Construct 3 is one of my favorite engines at this point. It's a native HTML5 engine. It's drag and drop. Literally, like you can have a platformer up and running in like 60 seconds, which is crazy. And it's surprising, but it's also awesome because it means more people can make games, and it changes the industry a little bit. It's no longer about can you make games, it's about maybe standing out from the crowd a little bit. It changes kind of the shift.
I gave a talk in 2016 in St. Petersburg at a conference there, describing how very soon someone was going to make an actual like really social game, and that this huge pile of money that was sitting on this proverbial table someplace just waiting for somebody to make a social game, somebody was going to start to cash in on that big pile, and that big pile would become obvious to people that it was sitting there, and it's been sitting there just waiting without anybody grabbing that money. And then 3 months later, Pokemon Go comes out, and I can't say I was surprised because obviously I was predicting this, but Pokemon Go comes out, it's this huge sensation, people go crazy, and then what surprised me was that after that, it seemed like no one noticed the big pile of money, because even Niantic didn't notice the big pile of money because they got so close to grabbing this big pile of money with Pokemon Go, and I thought, okay, well now they're going to hire the people they need to figure out how to make their next product really hit it. And no, I mean the next product, their Harry Potter game, didn't seem like it went anywhere. So I have to just think that they were successful by accident, but then didn't stop to think, why were we successful? What could we have done better? So they had this moment, this window of opportunity, and didn't step through the door. And no one else did either. They just keep making the same games and not realizing that this consumer demand for social interaction is there, and we're just not meeting it.
Okay. I guess I'll go, and then we'll throw it back to Shark. I think Tomo hit the nail on the head with regards to kind of the rise of the social aspect of playing a video game. So I guess I'll go in a different one as well. I would think the biggest surprise for me is just so much of the games as a service or continued development of a game, well beyond that initial release, has been a really big surprise. Because again, I think everyone here, I grew up playing games in the 90s where you finish a game, that's it. It goes on the shelf until you won't play it, remember it years down the line. I am still just shocked at the amount of work that goes into a game like Fortnite or any of the other Battle Royale games, that they are putting out bi-weekly updates to that game. And I just keep thinking to myself, it can't last. I'm still surprised that we're still talking about World of Warcraft 14 years later at this point. And I just don't know what is going to be next in terms of what people are expecting out of games beyond this live service model.
So I thought that Tomo noted too. So I have to come with something different. So mine is Discord. Discord, I think, has changed a lot of different things. It allows, in many different aspects. It's number one, it's a community tool, and you can gather your community there and grow it. Another, it's marketing. They had their own games platform for a while, and still a little bit, kind of. And now they have the streaming stuff, which kind of ties into Tomo's here, although it's very limited. We're sitting here talking about game dev on Discord. It's also allowed game dev communities to foster together, and provided a way to hire people with little experience and get hired, and find people to hire, and so it works both ways. And there's just so many different aspects that it has just kind of spider webbed kind of things together, and brought them all together.
I guess what's funny about that is this idea that it's why the hell didn't Skype do some of that?
Mm-hmm.
There's so many companies that lost their, the Blockbuster, the Circuit City, they're there, and then somebody just comes along and takes advantage of their sitting there. They could have.
Although it does mean that for ourselves, then, you can meet a certain level of success and be totally blind to what the next step is, and everyone around you will see it.
That clarity, man.
It's all about clarity, for sure.
Right.
Games as a service are my jam. I mean, this is what I do. I only make games as a service, and it surprises me. Or with the Fortnite, it's clear that they planned for success, so that when success happened, it wasn't a huge surprise to them, and they already had systems in place to allow them to keep dropping the content in that could keep this roller coaster going. So I look at my games the same way. I'm like, okay, let's plan this. Let's make this game and plan it for success, so that when the success happens, we're not like surprised and then caught flat-footed. We actually create the systems in the game so that and like on Gods Unchained, I've only been on the project for 2 months, but I'm already working with the team planning development out 2-3 years post-launch on the assumption that we'll be successful, and creating systems where we can drop that new content in rapidly to handle, ideally, a player base that could go to 1 million or even 10 million. And if we don't have the systems that'll keep that'll handle that expansion, it'll just explode and then crash. You have to have a pretty good idea how you're going to be able to succeed, and then you have to be ready for that success and what comes after that success.
I think that's a very interesting point, because we've seen developers, I think, struggle with both avenues of that. That they either have a bad game and they think I'm going to get 3 to 5, 7 years, whatever, out of it, and it doesn't work. Or we've seen developers who, like you said, Ramin, that they didn't expect it to succeed, and now they're kind of left with, like the golden ticket, and they don't know what to do with it. And an example that I've been thinking about that Mojo and Chad, we both played, was the game World War Z that came out earlier this year. It was basically pitched as, let's make Left 4 Dead again, because nobody else was making it. And it came out, and I think it completely blew expectations. Like, nobody thought this game was going to do anywhere near as well as it did. And developers left there going, yeah, we just made this as maybe a 10 to 20 hour long experience, and now we have all these people wanting more out of this game. And they basically had 2 to 3 months of just thinking, we need to come with more content for this because people still want to play it. And it's that very weird case, again, going back to my point about live service, that a lot of people are now expecting so much more out of their games these days. It's not just release a game and you're done. It's now release a game and people may want a lot more out of it.
Yeah, this is something I'm currently struggling with because our game is technically set up to be a live service, and I'm not necessarily aiming for it to be a live service. I'm aiming to release a really solid game that people enjoy, but I know that it could very well become so successful and get that golden ticket and be wildly successful, and I don't want to be caught there and not know what to do. But at the same time, I don't have any funds, and I don't need to take away funds from making the initial game as good as possible. So I'm doing as minimum planning as I can to not be totally caught off guard if this thing succeeds, at the same time of pretty much trying to stay laser focused on making the best game I can make, and so that if it does take off, I'm not just completely caught off guard. I'm assuming that no matter how much I prepare, if it does succeed, I'm going to be caught off guard. I'm just trying to minimize the amount that I'm caught off guard.
I think that's a good life strategy. How much to get caught off guard. I think a lot of developers, because starting a community that's worldwide and global and having people from all over the world, all sorts of technical skills, making games and seeing what everybody struggles with, I think planning for success is a big issue, but most people don't even think about what success means. They're just I want my game to be successful. What does that mean? How much, how many units, where do you want to go, what do you want to do with it, when is it a success, when is it not? I think just thinking through these kind of things and run-of-the-mill business stuff, right? By the end of the year we have to make X amount of money because we have this much burn and we got to cover our costs, and we have to try and raise our profit by whatever. A lot of just developers don't even think about And I think that's part of what I was talking about, making the games industry more accessible. We have more people that are less experienced coming in making games, and they're coming from all over the world, all different perspectives, all different technical skill sets, and so we're getting more people that are learning all this stuff for the first time.
Well, you know, the way we were talking about how it's best to treat the player, I think the same rules apply to treating your teammates and newcomers to the industry. I think a lot of, you know, I mean, it sounds kind of cheesy and extra nice, but Hyperkinetic Studios is all about socializing and social connections. I think that we kind of suck at biz dev, but luckily we started a company after long careers and a very robust network of friends, and that's what has allowed us to survive, really. And I think that if you just carry that lesson forward, the idea is, you know, make yourself available to newcomers, find them, hunt them down because they don't know how to find you, right? And offer them information.
I think I also fail when it comes to the business side, because every time I put up a goal or some kind of Patreon incentive, I just end up doing it anyway, even if we don't make it. So, like I was saying the last time, is like basically my whole model is pay me to do something, or I'll just do it anyway. You know, don't even worry about it. It'll just happen.
Hey, that approach works for me. That makes me much more likely to buy in on something like that.
When I started game design and game dev and even business, I thought that there was a way to do things that like everybody else knew, and like I just had to learn it, right? Like I thought there was a right way,
Yeah.
and I just had to learn the secrets and the strategies and how to do business, how to make games. But like the more I realize it, the more I see it like an RPG kind of stat sheet of like some people got +10 in intelligence and some people have, you know, different stats in different areas, but they can be successful in a completely different way than you ever could because they have different abilities. And I think it's important to kind of play to your strengths, right? Like do the things that you're good at that other people can't do in the same way that you can, and you can be just as successful as long as you understand those and you kind of like, you know, work towards them. Same thing with game design. Make the game that you can make, you know, don't try and make the game that AAA studio or that other person with different resources and different skills have trying to make.
We're in an industry where the failure rate, especially in mobile, is 95%. Given that, I'm a strong believer that with enough science and technology and that you can unlock, there are certain secrets to game design that you can utilize to get a hit every time. You can have 100% assured success. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, did you build the right team to do that? And having the right social environment in your studio is critical, and it's very hard, especially in game dev, because a lot of gamers, frankly, are good at the technical side of game creation, but they're not really, their social skills are not that good. That's part of why they play computer games instead of going out and dating or doing other things. So getting that social structure right in the studio is really the final frontier in gaming, I think, for us to pull off these major projects.
I would agree with your statement about a way to create or make predictable success, except that it would focus very heavily on being able to analyze the instantaneous state of the audience. Because without knowing them, then it gets really hard to make, like, the formulas that have outputs need to have massive audience data input.
If you're relying on data-driven design, but if you're relying on physiological design, then you already know how the person's going to react before they do it.
But you don't know necessarily what the best way to trigger those results are, because of, like, I'm just talking about keeping track of pop culture. It's like, unless you got an army of 14-year-olds backing you up, it might be tricky.
Let's see. Thorn. Oh yeah.
I need a little more time to prove my argument. Give me a few more years.
Well, ultimately, I don't know, right? But my kind of like my perspective on it is that I've shifted so much of my thinking about how to create a sound system that engages the generic human, And so much more of it is shifted over time to who are these people? What do they need? And why are they different than those other people?
It's interesting hearing you guys talk because like my strategy is the complete opposite. Like I've probably made dozens of games over the last couple years, and my strategy really is to kind of discover what works and not design it. Kind of just make a bunch of stuff, and like people resonated with the one thing, and I'm gonna go with that one thing. And also from a business perspective, to kind of rather than maximize the profits, like minimize the risk. So like just reduce what I have, like I'm not going to mortgage my house and go crazy and try and make an epic, crazy MMO and cross my fingers. But like, if you spend less money, you can possibly increase your chances of being profitable because you have to make back less. Different perspectives. Like I kind of lean startup kind of philosophy to creativity and game design.
I think I followed a similar. Oh, go ahead, Chucky.
Feeding off what Tim said, I'm more on the design side and design something that works, and then the issue is I'm not a good programmer. I'm an okay artist when it comes to pixel art, but not great. And when my games don't fit pixel art, that doesn't work at all. And I have nothing in music, so like the big three things that you need, I don't really have. So, because I'm focused on the design and the writing and everything, and I have to find other teammates to help me out. And like I said earlier, finding a team has been my kind of Achilles heel, because like sometimes I'll find somebody that will work with me for 5, 6, 7 years kind of thing. Sometimes I'll find somebody that will work with me for about 2 days. And it's the issue is I don't have a budget to exactly pay people a lot of money, or even at all in some cases. So even though I have a design down, it doesn't help me nail it down kind of thing.
Money's a brutal constraint. And it just is what it is.
I don't envy his situation at all.
I think it can be fantastic though, because one of the things I'm doing with Cypherpunk is it's a 1,000-hour project. That's the limit. 1,000 hours, which is 6 months full-time dev, but I'm not doing it full-time. That's based on a monthly burn cost. I spend around $2,000 a month. That's 6 months full-time dev. That's about $12,000 investment of time. And if you think about it that way, right? And so the profit ceiling for that game doesn't have to be very high to be profitable. If that's the constraint, you just have to like think about it in those terms. And I think money and time are probably the two biggest ones in the industry. But like, if you embrace your constraints and you look at them like, rather than, I can't do this because of, rather you say, okay, these are the constraints. What can we do with that? I think that becomes a beautiful way to design things too. Like there's a lot of design challenges in my game where it's like, okay, I have this inventory system, or I have this whatever, and the problem is the player doesn't notice this. How do we change this without affecting this, without messing with the economy? You know what I mean? And given those constraints, defining the question, what is the actual question, you can come up with better answers, I think.
Yeah, you make me jealous with the $12,000. I mean, over 6 months. I mean, our last game, if you don't count the LLC business stuff, it was a 3-year project game, and only $150 were spent on that game. So, and right now on Project Triad, I mean, we're maybe 7-8 months in, and so far we're at 0 with a promised about 1,000 out there.
Are you guys keeping track of your time though?
Well, by you guys, you mean me. No, I have not kept track.
Time is money though. Like that's part of the equation.
Yeah, you can't discount the value of human capital. And
the reason I did this, by the way, is because Philophobia, a platformer, took me 4 years, and I made about 10 grand total in that entire project, which is a massive failure when you take into account 4 years. That's it would be impossible for me to try to live that. So like that's one of the reasons why I'm tracking all this stuff. I'm doing this, and partly because I run a YouTube channel where I want to inspire people too. So I want to share all this stuff. But it's really interesting to me, like how many different approaches there are to like the same thing, right? The goal is profitability. At least my goal is, right? So there are a lot of ways to get there. You just gotta think about everything involved, and prepare for success, prepare for failure, understand the different things and the different numbers involved with those things.
And remember, the first biggest thing you can do to improve the quality of iterations is to track.
Yeah, my goal has never been profitability. I mean, it has, but it hasn't at the same time. My goal is to finally get to the position to where I can make the first game I started designing, which is my dream game. But to get to that point, we have to be extremely profitable.
So isn't your goal kind of profitability then?
Yeah, kind of, but not technically.
That's the thing, is the more money's a resource, and the more resources you have, the more you can do, right? And I think it's a good life philosophy. People say, oh, you shouldn't be greedy or whatever, but if you just think about it. Like if you want to help people, if you have more money, you can help more people. It's a general global resource in this RTS game of life. Okay, the more you have of it, the more you can do. So I think profitability is not a bad goal, and it doesn't make you selling out. It doesn't make you an evil game developer. It just makes it sustainable. You can continue to do the thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the same thing that I do with Game Wisdom, and why I allow guest posts on my site for pay, why I do the library presentations, the book deals, and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, if you have zero money coming in, you're not able to support yourself, and it all goes away. And there has to be, like Tim said, if you want to help more people, you need to have those resources available to do so.
My approach here was very different than everyone else's, and I don't even recommend my approach. I saw the gaming industry as just as unassailable as the towers that protect Hollywood from people who want to get into it. And especially in my case, as a Middle Eastern name, I have additional obstacles. So my approach was to make myself so valuable to a studio that they couldn't say no. And my path ended up being literally to spend 40,000 hours, including going back to school time at the age of 41, to create such an intense skill set that was unique in the industry that literally studios couldn't say no when I finally was ready to go back to industry in 2011. And I was working double full time for 10 years before I made my first dollar in the industry at the end of 2011. But a year later, I was working for Microsoft as a first game economist, and a year after that, I was on national public radio 4 times talking about games. So that's if you'd want to skip all the stuff in the middle and go straight to the top. But I mean, I literally was homeless part of that time. I was on food stamps. But I think if anything, the takeaway here isn't that you should spend your entire life in school or study anything. The takeaway is that if you want to get into Hollywood, or if you want to get into gaming as an industry, you have to be willing to fail over and over and over and over and over again, and still keep going and still pick yourself up and have contingencies for what are you going to do when you fail, because you're going to repeatedly. Nothing is more important in this industry as a developer than tenacity.
100%. That's what my whole YouTube channel is about. It's about reframing failure, I think, because most people think failure, that's the point where everything goes wrong and you quit. But if you look at failure as a thing didn't work and I learned a thing from it, I learned a lesson from it, now what can I reapply? And just, it should never cross your mind to like, now I gotta quit. It's just you think of it as far as iterate on your approach. I used to run a marketing company. It was the same thing. Like we put out an ad. Okay, if the ad doesn't work, we don't go, I guess we can't make you any money, client, sorry. No, we change the ad. Does that are we doing better numbers or worse numbers? If we're doing worse numbers, go back to the original ad. If we're doing better numbers, okay, let's make a new ad, test it against a new ad, right? And split test that whole thing. It's an iterative process, and I think I look at life as a giant experiment, and I constantly iterate on everything from like my routine to like my design process, and I think it's an important life lesson.
Oh yeah, and we're talking about that in the chat as well. The importance of dealing with and accepting failure. I mean, I've done it myself many times over with Game Wisdom and the YouTube channel, and I'm still not at that point where I can say that I am, firmly secure in what I'm doing. But I haven't given up yet. I keep putting more stuff out there, and it's important to be able to do that. And I say this in my presentation about game development. Many people, first timers, will think, I'll just spend 10 years of my life on my very first project and it will succeed, and I'll pay all the money back, and I don't think about it if it fails. But if you fail, that's it. Like, if you put yourself in that position where if one thing goes wrong, you're entirely, then what do you do then? And some of the developers who have managed to survive the longest have always had those safeguards in place, or they know not, like we said, they know not to take 2-3 mortgages out on their home, thinking that this idea is going to pay it all back.
Well, I feel like we get so caught up in the emotional negativity around failure that we overlook how you really can't describe learning through our successes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the trajectory of growth is only through the failures. Because if you're already able to do something, then that's where you're at. And if you're not pushing yourself to fail, then you're not growing. And unless you're already able to do it, and if you're already able to do it, you probably know you're already able to do it. If you're questioning that, then you need to get out there and learn new stuff and figure things out. And that means you kind of have to fail. It's not even how do you cope with failure or how you mitigate failure. Mm-hmm. It's how do you fail? Mm-hmm. How do you get out there so that you actually get in a situation where something that you are incapable of, you will try to do. And it's like, I mean, it's been a big part of me, trying to raise the kids to be reasonable, I guess.
People ask me quite a bit on my channel, like how to get confidence, because that seems to be a thing in the industry, and especially with lack of social skills a lot of us have, it's important. But I always thought there was a difference between confidence and courage. Like, courage is doing the thing even when you're scared. Confidence is kind of, you're not really scared of the thing anymore because you've done it. But courage or confidence comes from like the experience, and that's pretty much the only way to do it. Like, you got to do the thing over and over again. And I think that the best way to make failure less scary is to literally just fail. Like, it's terrifying if you've never done it before. If you're releasing a game, if you've never failed on the game launch, it's going to be, I was terrified for my first commercial. I spent so much time obsessing, like, not only what are they going to think of it, is it making a good game? Like, I run a YouTube channel on how to make better games. What if I make a bad game? Like, it just, stuff was going through my head, right? But like, none of that stuff really matters. What matters is like, it's going to happen either way. You got to do the thing, gain the experience, gain the confidence that you get from doing it. And then if you did fail in a way, learn from it. Even if you succeeded, learn from it, take the lessons and apply them.
Yeah. And I think like one of the best examples of that would be like doing these kinds of podcasts and public speaking. Like, there are people out there who are, mortified at talking either on Skype or let alone talking on camera. I've had developers like that for many of my podcasts in the past, and it was the same way for me. Like, for people who got my little Josh Box offer, like, I included in there my very first podcast. And you can hear just how horrible I was day one trying to do a podcast with a developer. And today, it has become second nature. I mean, we've had this discussion for almost 2 hours now, and I haven't really like gotten tired or win at all. Ramin, though, at the start, like 2 hours is like, basic for these kinds of conversations. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of experience to get to that point. And there are people out there, like we've said again with failure, that when they see failure, that is the dead end. That is, this didn't work, give it all up. I'm done. Throw it all out. Let's go do something else. But I think that's been a major part about video games. And I kind of want to relate this to game design in a second. But it's an idea of being able to adapt and keep going and keep, like I said earlier, with some like Biome Isaac, being able to pivot, I think is a very important skill.
Hey, since you brought up the 2 hours, I have to remind you I have to go pretty soon because
Yeah.
my Sydney studio is waking up and we just launched Gods Unchained, so they're needing me. But you may have noticed that I keep doing podcasts from like a hammock or from my bed, or and people make jokes about it. But literally, I don't own a chair. I don't own a table. I really don't own any furniture because of this stuff. In 3 weeks, I'm going to be in Australia. What's the point of even having material things that don't fit in a suitcase if you're just going to be traveling from country to country, which is my gypsy tech life. I envy Tim and Sharky that they can just do it all by themselves and don't need anyone else. They can stay in their own home or studio and develop games year after year. I never know where I'm going to live next year. So I literally have a gypsy lifestyle, and that's why I don't own nice things other than maybe computers.
To be clear, I don't do it solo. I just have really small teams. Normally 2, 3, somewhere in there.
Yeah. And again, like we could sit here for like, if it wasn't for time considerations, we could sit here and be like another 3-4 hours easily. Because
It just means we got to do it again.
of course, I think that's always
well.
the poor us, right? That's like the worst possible outcome. I guess here's my final design question then for the cast. I think this is a good point to end on, again, about that idea of embracing failure. And I've been thinking again about roguelike and kind of Souls-like design as well with that. And how these games, like, I think Dark Souls, or even by extension Demon Souls, came out like at almost like the perfect time for that game to succeed. Because I was again thinking about Dead Rising, a lot of the kind of proto roguelikes, and how people hated that kind of gameplay. And I just want to get everybody's thoughts on, like, why did a game like Demon Souls succeed so well? Because it is a very brutal game. It is a game that you are supposed to fail. And like, again, leading this back to game dev, a lot of people are taught failure is the end. Like, failure is the worst possible thing that can happen to you. And this was a game that kind of said, no, failure is just, the next step. You have to keep going after that.
Yeah, I don't really know. I never got really into those kind of games, but a little hypothesis that I thought of is, history repeats itself. So maybe maybe Dark Souls and Demon Souls and all this is a repeat back on our history of the arcades, when the arcades were brutally hard, and they would you would have your self reward if you could get good enough at the game to beat it on only one quarter, kind of thing. And maybe Dark Souls is kind of applying back to that kind of feel to a point.
Oh, does that mean I'm on deck?
Sure.
I think that there are a lot of games out there that that allow for failure to occur in a way that players don't recognize, the same way they do other games where failure is awkward and punishing. I think that a lot of the games generally set expectations for their worlds, and if players are led to accept failure, then it's just not an issue. And I think especially in environments where there are hard but believable skill constraints, it's a great environment to have failure, because the player feels like they made a mistake and that they're learning the system. If we go back to some of that uncertainty talk, they're wiping away kind of their ability to physically use their hands to kind of deal with the noisiness of the situation to produce good results. And as they keep trying, they do get better. They get more, their knowledge base improves and their physical skill at the game improves. So that progress allows them to stay engaged and not feel too punished. Well, they don't feel too punished because, something about the harshness of the rules sets their expectations that failure is okay. I mean, I think for myself in Epic Tavern, it's actually a topic that comes up all the time. We are trying constantly to create an environment where players are tolerant of failure. And in our efforts to create tolerance or excitement about failure is that we literally have tons of content on the losing of encounters and quests and in negative states for characters. All these things are littered with all kinds of, sometimes tuned specifically to be better rewards than the successes, so that players can start acclimating to and accepting that kind of an experience. I guess the answer to the actual question in terms of why were the Souls games successful? I mean, lots of reasons, but I think people were ready for some difficulty. I think that we had taken a period of time where the games had gotten easy, and that game developers were maybe a bit too fixated on taking care of the player and not enough on challenging them.
I think timing played a big role. I agree with Tomo. There are a lot of specific things. People don't realize how many thousands of things in a game that can change the way you perceive something. Like on death, for example, if you have a big screen that flashes red and some epic arrow and then some skull and then boom, you died and crazy particles go everywhere, and then it just sits there for like 3 seconds and makes you like take it in. That's way different than like boom, and like a fade out, right? Or it's way different than like a boom, restart level. Like Phasmophobia did this. One of the constraints with this precision platformer was all the levels fit on one screen. You can see the whole screen there. And when you die, it's instant restart. So, but it wasn't always like that, right? I had these big, massive levels and I realized people were dying and then they were quitting. And it took a lot of time and effort to figure out, okay, well, even with the level design, like some levels have harder pieces to them than others, but if you put those harder pieces first in the beginning where they die and then they restart right there rather than way over here and then they have to get to the hard parts again, it changes the whole psychology of it. So like Dark Souls specifically, it's hard to take a thing that has so many thousands of pieces to it, from everything from UX to UI to design to like all this stuff, and say why it worked. But I think there are a lot of things in that game that like it's possible to make a difficult game without making you feel like it's just horrible. Like that like it, the game can teach you, like exactly like Tomo said, like how to feel about failure. And I think even the word Dark Souls, it is kind of like the whole game, the whole lore and everything about it makes it, that's kind of part of that world, and it can do a good job of that. I also think timing can play a huge role. And if you look at any success, I think there's at least a couple things you can point to and say, this hit this person at this right time and this thing happened, or this, you can always do that.
Okay.
I would say that players want to be challenged. Everyone's agreeing this. Players want to be challenged, and they really enjoy visually being able to see themselves improve. Say, oh wow, I did much better that time than I did the time before. And they're only going to see that improvement if they're continually challenged. And so if they get to a point where, yeah, I keep seeing myself improving for the first 2 hours, but now I'm not improving because the game has gotten too easy and there's nothing to challenge me, then they get bored. But I have to admit, I don't play these types of games because I avoid high stress, real time, reflex matters type of games because they raise my cortisol levels. I think these types of games are mostly aimed at a younger audience that doesn't have money, and so my focus is mostly on much more relaxing, thought-provoking social games that are aimed at an older audience that largely is not being served by the gaming community now. And that older audience has a lot more money, and I'm at the point in my career where I would like to finally enjoy that money.
I think I just came up with the next cast. All five of us could play Slay the Spire together. We'll spend like 40 minutes a turn trying to pick the card for the group.
I like Slay the Spire. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
So do I.
All
Oh,
right.
I'm so good with action games. I just not a big fan of making them anymore, I guess.
All right, but again, we could be here for who knows how many more hours, but I want to thank everybody for coming on. Like we said, if you guys are free in the coming weeks, we can always set up for another one of these because this was a lot of fun.
I'm down.
For sure.
Yeah, I'd love to do a podcast from Sydney, so I could get back in my hammock or whatever. Broadcast on the beach.
All right. So I think with that said, we're going to do one more around the group here. I'm going to give each of you a chance to, for people watching who want to follow you, what you do, anything in terms of social media, whatever. So again, we'll start with Shark and go round.
Well, first off, you know I'm down for coming back. I'm always here. So you can follow me on Twitter at Nexus Games INC1. And you can also join our Discord, the Nexus Games Discord, and Josh will probably have a link down below. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
And for myself, again, I'm Tomo Moriwaki. We have a Discord channel, Discord GG/Epic Tavern. We definitely like having conversations about game dev and storytelling, and the game itself. We also do dev streams 3 times a week and dev chats in Discord a couple times a week as well. And our game, Epic Tavern, is available on Steam Early Access right now.
My name is Ramin Chokrizada. I'm that guy with the intimidating name. I've written for 7 years on Gama Sutra. I write a lot of articles about game economics, game design, how to make healthier games, game ethics, and my 2 current projects are Destiny's Sword, being developed in Toronto by Two Dogs, which is going to be the first MMO to accurately model mental health effects over time from battle. We're very excited about that. And the other one is Gods Unchained, being developed by Immutable in Sydney, which is going to take card gaming to a whole new level by using blockchain to make sure that players can play to earn and own their own game assets, that no one, not even us, can take them away, and they can do whatever they want with them, trade them, sell them, whatever they want to do, so we can have true ownership.
Mm-hmm. And Rami, I know you don't do too much on social media, so you don't have a Twitter handle, right?
Yeah, I keep a very low profile because I actually got death threats because of my name in 2001 and had to write under an alias for 10 years. And I just live with the fact that I can't be that social because of my ethnicity.
That's horrible.
Yeah.
My name is Tim Roswick. You can follow Gamedev Underground, which is my YouTube channel on YouTube. I post how to build, finish, and launch better games, all kinds of stuff, the non-technical side of game dev, motivation, marketing, all that kind of stuff. You can follow me there, or you can join our Discord at invite.gg/GameDevU. It's a community of thousands of developers all over the world that are all making games together, and we support each other and help each other out. Because even though I'm a solo developer, I don't make games alone, so I don't think anybody should. I think it's fun. So I'm happy to be a part of this. It's been awesome.
All right. And for myself, again, for those of you watching on the channel here, if you enjoy things, be sure to subscribe. We do daily videos on design. We do more podcasts like this. We also have game developer casts as well. You can follow me on Twitter at GWBicer. And again, we have the Game Wisdom Discord channel open to all. That'll be in the description down below. But I think with that, again, we could certainly pivot to 27 more topics if we wanted to, but we will wrap things up for tonight. And if you guys enjoy this, we can always do this again. So thank you to everybody watching. Again, thank you to you guys for coming on. And I'll be back later tonight for my regular streaming around 9:30. And come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. And again, this will go up As soon as it's done encoding, it will be going up live. So there's no need to wait on it. So thanks again for watching. Have a great night, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye,
Thank you so
everybody.
much, gentlemen.
See ya.
Bye, guys.
Bye bye.